followed me from the mine, and the screaming started. It followed me from the mine, and the screaming started. I tell myself the words are dramatic when I write them down, but they are the only sentence that sits honest on the page. That night, I had been the last to leave a shaft they'd closed for decades. Low beams, the taste of iron in my mouth, the way the rail lines swallowed the light like an animal's throat. I was cataloging, just cataloging, when I found the shallow letters along a wall. They fit between my gloved fingers like a name. I remember the helmet more clearly than the hours that followed. It looked like any other relic, dented, wax-stained, a cracked lens. I turned it over, and something rattled tiny pebbles, maybe, or an old scrap of paper. I sat on a crate and listened to the mine breathe. There was a thin sound underneath the wind, a tight hum that made my molars ache. The notes I'd been tracing with a flashlight kept making patterns I couldn't name. On the way home, I stopped at the edge of the service road and wrote one thing in my notebook. It remembers what we forget. The sentence looked ridiculous on the page, then practical, then absurd. By the time I reached my apartment, the city felt small and schematic, a map I could fold and put away. I had the helmet in a canvas bag, and on the bus, the motion of strangers made the hum in my head feel louder, as if the sound could pass through human bodies and grow teeth. At my desk, I set the helmet down and switched on the battered tape recorder, more out of ritual than need. Its red light blinked once and then steadied. I pressed record and spoke, because silence in that room was too much like listening for a trapdoor. I said my name, the date, and the catalog numbers. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't meant to narrate. The recorder might as well have been a mirror. When I played it back later, there were 11 seconds of nothing that sounded like a cough, and then a thin, layered sound like someone breathing through paper. The next morning, the carved letters stayed in my head. I tried to photograph them, but the photos blurred where the marks were. I returned to the mine in daylight, because logic is a stubborn thing when fear sits on the other shoulder. The shaft was emptier in the sun. Small animals had returned to the mouth, like birds reclaiming a ruined house. The deeper tunnel had new footprints, narrow and mudless, lining the rails toward where I'd stood with the helmet. They ended where my own light had been the night before. Back home, I found one of my maps folded into a new shape on the table. I'd left nothing on the table but a cup and a pencil. The paper had a small impression pressed into the corner like the shape of a foot without mud, 3 small notches, and a longer, pointed heel. I began to pin my days to patterns, what I ate when the recorder blinked, the way the streetlight outside swelled at 3 in the morning. A geometry of small anxieties formed, and I tracked them like constellations that never aligned. Sometimes the sound arrived without prelude, a high, internal scream that lived inside the bones of the room. It never announced itself as a noise so much as a pressure, like someone had closed a door on all the air. It made the tape recorder wobble on the desk and the glass in my windows hum. Once it set the candle in the helmet to smoking, though the wax hadn't been melted since I'd found it. I cut the power more often, as if darkness could expel an idea. I taped fragments of paper across the apartment, notes to myself that read like instructions. Do not follow, name IT, listen at the edge. They were practical staples against an unsettlement I couldn't own. The more I tried to organize the strange into tasks, the more the tasks took on a life. 2 of the notes were arranged in a formation I didn't remember making, pointing toward the window like hands. Outside, the mine's silhouette lay like an accusation under the moon. One night, the recorder filled with layers that weren't mine. A thin voice humming under a line of wind, a pattern of taps like someone counting along the rails. I slowed the tape, sped it up, listened until the edges of my thoughts frayed. Somewhere in it, the hum resolved into vowels that didn't fit any language I knew. My throat tightened because recognition is a treacherous thing. The cadence suggested memory rather than intent, as if the mine were repeating the way a house repeats a family's old arguments. I started waking with small marks on my skin. A faint line on my wrist like a rope had brushed it. 2 shallow impressions across a forearm. They faded by noon, but each morning they returned in slightly different places, as if something were testing the map of my body. I told myself they were sleep twitches, that my hands made them when I turned. Then, I found a note tucked under my pillow in handwriting that wasn't mine. It finds the plains between days. On a thin, windless morning, I took the helmet back to the mine because people put things back where they belong, and because sometimes returning a relic closes a door. I walked the rails until the daylight thinned and the tunnel settled its teeth. Near the marks, I'd first found the narrow footprints changed direction, aligned themselves along the stone, as if pointing to someone standing beyond the pitch. I stood very still and listened, and the internal scream shifted, like a throat learning a new vowel. I left the helmet where I'd found it and walked away feeling both lighter and more exposed. For a brief, dangerous hour, the apartment seemed less full of presence. Then the screaming started again, but this time it threaded through the city, through pipes, through the radiator, as if the mine had learned to speak through different materials. The tape recorder's red light blinked steadily on the shelf, even though it had been unplugged for days. I pressed my palm to the glass of the window and watched my reflection tremble. The final thing that happened was small and therefore believable. A sound at the edge of sleep, a syllable that might have been my name. I sat up and listened. The apartment held its breath. Outside the window, the mine's mouth looked like a closed mouth. I could have opened the window, screamed back, called someone, or burned every scrap of paper on my desk. Instead, I cued the tape recorder and whispered into its waiting red light, "If you came with me, you must leave with me." The cassette captured my voice, and then, faint and layered, a reply that might have been gratitude or instruction or an arrangement of another language entirely. I don't offer closure because I don't have it. Sometimes the scream returns at 3 in the morning. Sometimes the tape plays back and there is only silence. Sometimes there are new marks, not on me, but on the inside of a shelf or the edge of a map, shallow letters I can almost read. I sleep with the recorder beside my pillow and the helmet stuffed in the closet. When I wake, I find my notes arranged differently. I leave one final question on the page. If a sound can learn the shape of you, what is left for you to teach it?